Well, it's extremely important that we get the economy moving again in central New York, and particularly make sure that every person who wants a job has a job. And until that happens, I don't believe that this economic crisis is over. Now, the way to do that is to balance the budget, but in the right way. And to do it in the right way, one of the things I think we need to do is have a more balanced trade policy. We need to make sure that we enter not just into free trade agreements, but free trade agreements that are fair, particularly to our manufacturers. And we need to get rid of these tax breaks that encourage jobs to move overseas and actually reward these companies that outsource. The second thing I think we need to do is make prudent investment in infrastructure, particularly transportation infrastructure. I would like to see high-speed rail in upstate New York. I think we can do it, just as our ancestors built the Erie Canal, even though people told them that maybe it couldn't be done, and even President Jefferson was skeptical. I think we can do high-speed rail. I think it would help put central New York back on the map. We also, though, need to make improvements in our air travel and our roads and bridges. And the third thing I think we need to do is invest in education. If our kids have decent education, if we give them a fair shot, then they will be able to provide for the economy of the future. And that goes right through pre-K, through college or trade school. We need to work with our colleges and universities to make school affordable for everyone. And what we don't need to do is do massive cuts to education or leave Albany in charge of pre-K through 12. Well, I think it's very important that we become energy independent. We shouldn't have to depend on countries across the world for our energy, nor should we have to depend on these vast oil conglomerates. So one of the things we need to do is stop the subsidies to big oil companies, and instead we need to invest in renewable fuels so we eventually can become a renewable economy. Here in central New York, we have companies, small startups to larger companies, and we have universities such as the State University of New York in Syracuse is the School of Environmental Science and Forestry, where I taught a year. We have Syracuse University. We have Cuba Community College. We have a number of other colleges and universities doing research on clean, renewable energies that not only would help the environment, but would also lower the cost of energy and make us energy independent. Well, first of all, I think that it's vitally important that we strengthen our public schools. The one thing we want to make sure is that our children have all the opportunity and that we don't leave anybody out. And to do that, I think we need to sort of change the way we think about education. Right now, the rules and regulations come from Washington or Albany, but all the funding comes from the local area. And instead of that, we need to have some sort of a national priority for education, and we need to make sure that we make the investments necessary. In terms of colleges, we need to stop sending our kids to college and then having them have this huge mortgage, the student loans that they have to pay back, but no house to do so. Instead, I think we need to continue to make college more affordable. We have the Say Yes program in Syracuse. That's a good start, but we need those programs everywhere. And the way that works is that it works with colleges and universities to make sure that good qualified students can get the education they need. It's so important that we hold health insurance companies and HMOs accountable. We need to make sure that somebody with a pre-existing condition can still get health insurance. We need to make sure that you don't just get cut off if you have cancer and you end up what used to be called a lifetime limit. You could be facing cancer and bankruptcy at the same time. We just can't have that, and we need to address further the medical cost. One way of doing that is, and that we're doing a lot of research in central New York, is making more efficient medical records. That way, when physicians, hospitals, other healthcare providers are doing something, they can make sure that there isn't redundant care, they're not doing the same test over and over again, and they can find out the information they need about a patient with the patient's permission and improve efficiency that way. What we've got is a good start, but there's still so much more to do. Well, Social Security and Medicare are both vital programs. And they've been successful over the life of those programs. We've had seniors go from over half in poverty to less than 10%. But we do need to make sure that we strengthen them, not change them into a voucherized system or other things that the Buerkle-Ryan budget would do. But in terms of strengthening them, one of the key things we need to do is work on getting health care costs down. You know, you look at Medicare, and it really isn't a Medicare crisis, it's a health care cost crisis that then Medicare and Social Security end up bearing the burden of. So in order to get health care costs down, we need to continue to make the reforms that will lead to more efficient care and make sure that care is left up to a doctor and the patient. And if we can get health care costs down, then I'm confident that Medicare will not only be here for the current generation, but for future generations to come. Well, I do think it's important that we maintain the tax cuts for working families. Particularly, there's a tax cut that helps pay back some of the payroll taxes. Those are those taxes that get taken out of your paycheck every month, and if you look at your paycheck, it's like a big bite. But there's a tax cut that gives you back, if you're a typical New York State family, about $1,000. Well, Marie Buerkle voted against that. So she says she's for tax cuts, but then if it's a tax cut for working families, she's not. But I do think we need to keep those tax cuts. And in fact, I may be a little bit more conservative than the president. I would keep the tax cuts for everybody making under $1 million. That way you make sure that small businesses, farms, those kind of entities, that they won't see a tax increase either right now. And for those making over $1 million, move it back to the Clinton level, the Clinton era levels. Multi-millionaires did just fine under Bill Clinton, and I think we can do that and then have a great resource for paying down the deficit. In terms of other kinds of things, what we need to do is simplify our tax code. We need to keep it fair, but we also need to make sure that people pay it. These large discrepancies when you have middle-class people paying between 15 and 20% and people like Mitt Romney paying much, much less. It just doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that everyone pays their fair share.
We recently saw the national debt. It increased more than $16 trillion now. To address the debt, what would you cut, or what revenues would you look at, revenue-raising items would you look at to address the debt?
Well, there's several places to start there. We do need to balance the budget, but we do need to do it in the right way. The right way means that first of all, we do get rid of these oil subsidies, that it's just a pure payment to big oil and gas companies that are already very, very profitable. That would go a long way. Let's get rid of these tax incentives to move jobs overseas. Why are we giving companies a bigger tax break if they move manufacturing away when we need manufacturing here? That will not only save money, but it will help our manufacturing base, which will then increase revenues in the long run. I also think there are things that we can do to cut waste and abuse in government. There always are. I can give you examples of that right in Congress. I mean, why is the public paying for the House gym and those kind of things, and members of Congress can pay for it themselves? One thing that Marie Buerkle has voted to put back is this health care benefit when members of Congress retire. I don't think that's necessary. And then the last thing I would do is I would make sure that we only spend our defense dollars on things that are really necessary for the national security of the United States. And this continuing action in Afghanistan, we're nation building there, and I don't think our men and women should be put in harm's way, and I don't think we should be spending taxpayer dollars to build bridges and schools in another country when we need to build bridges and schools here in the United States. Well, I would be so grateful that I think that the most important thing would be to introduce a bill that would all these policies that we talk about, I think we can do. I mean, we can't do it in one bill, but maybe I would be a bill to help people afford higher education, whether it's college or trade school, because I think even with all there's so many priorities, but that would send a message to our young people that if they work hard, if they study hard, that they will get the education they need to then go into the workforce. Right now, we're starting out our kids with a mortgage but no house, and you wonder if there's a mortgage crisis whether they're going to come along and repossess these kids' brains or something. Of course, they can't do that. So, we need to make sure that college is affordable. We've got programs that help do that now, Pell Grants and other things, but we need to make sure that kids can afford it. They have loans, that's fine, but let's help them pay off their loans if they're willing to do jobs that we need. For instance, believe it or not, we have a physician shortage in Central New York, particularly primary care. If somebody studies hard and can go to medical school and become a doctor and they're willing to come back to Central New York, let's help them with their student loans. That'll end up being an investment that will spur economic growth, particularly in places like Central New York. So now that you ask, I think that's the first bill I would introduce. Well, when I was in office before, and everything I try to do now and am dedicated to is for keeping the middle class strong in Central New York. Central New York is a middle class area. We need to make sure that the middle class, people who get up in the morning and work every day, and drive their kids around and send their kids to public schools, that the middle class is thriving. If the middle class is not in good shape, then Central New York will go with it. And the way to do that, as I say, balance the budget, but make sure you do it in the right way. Don't completely change programs like Social Security and Medicare and make them into voucher programs as the Marie Buerkle budget would, and invest in key areas where you'll see a financial return, like education and infrastructure, and allow people to afford college for their kids. This is the key thing, I think. Central New York, with all of its universities, its wonderful clean water economy, its wonderful land area, and such wonderful traditions, ethnic traditions all throughout the district. If the middle class is healthy in Central New York, then Central New York will be healthy.